Are you ready for this year's coverage of the Axis and Allies World Championship? Well, we've seen the crowning of the first ever tournament champs for the brand new Axis and Allies North Africa. We've introduced you to the two young guns from New Orleans that took home the hardware in the 1942 second edition tournament, but now it's time for the main event. Time to prepare for battle as we take you tableside at Gen Con for the 2024 Axis and Allies World Championships featuring the Anniversary Edition. Let's make it hot. Welcome to Board Game Nation. My name is Gary Blevins. Thank you so much for watching. And a very special thank you to our friends at Renegade Game Studios for sponsoring our 4-part coverage of the 2024 Axis and Allies World Championships. Follow the link in the description to learn more about the full line of Axis and Allies products and so much more. In 2023, Renegade Game Studios sponsored the very first Axis and Allies World Championship at Gen Con in Indianapolis. Specifically, the game in question that year was 1942 Second Edition, and my teammate, Doug Thorpe, and I were thrilled to take home that very first title. Now, the Axis and Allies events at Gen Con have been organized by the incomparable Greg Smorey for the past 30+ years and features tournaments in a wide variety of A&A games. But in 2024, the Anniversary Edition took center stage as the World Championship event. Today, we're going to dive into that tournament, starting with a quarterfinal match featuring some of the biggest names in the game. But more on that in a minute. First, some context. At Gen Con 2024, I opted not to play in any of the events. Instead, Board Game Nation brought a production team to capture the action of loads of Axis and Allies events and more, with the goal of bringing you a tableside look at some of these amazing games. But if this is your first time here, welcome. Here's how this works. Even the shortest A&A games can be hours long, and even as much as I love this game, I find watching raw gameplay video about as much fun as watching paint dry slowly. So what we've done is record every detail of our featured games, and then we rebuild those games in the studio and take still images to make the action much easier to follow. Today, Doug and I are going to give you a full battle report of the quarterfinal match, discuss some strategies and tactical options, and try to have some fun along the way. In fact, today's featured match is between our own Doug Thorpe and the creator of AxisandAllies.org, Mr. Dave Jensen, along with his partner and previous tournament winner, Keith Spradling. This should be fun. You might have noticed a few items behind me that are signed by the man himself, the creator of Axis and Allies and many other fantastic games, Mr. Larry Harris. In December of 2024, we launched Board Game Nation memberships, and to celebrate, we gave away a pile of amazing gifts, and behind me are just a few of the items that we still have in store for future giveaways. Thank you to all of our charter members for being with us at the beginning, and if you'd like to be a part of our upcoming special events, connect with players from around the world, get early access to videos like this one, engage with member-only content, or you just want to support us as we work to make more content like this, click that join button below and consider becoming an official citizen of Board Game Nation. Our live streams are back. Doug and I are going to be live from Board Game Nation Studios on the Friday following the release of this video to share our thoughts and answer community questions about this game and really anything Axis and Allies related. We hope to see you there. But if you can't make it, that's okay. That conversation will be available at BoardGameNation.com shortly after it wraps up. Now for the Choose Your Own Adventure portion of the show. If this is your first time here and you've never played in an Axis and Allies tournament before, please keep your seats and hang out for a moment. We've got some important information to share that's going to help all this make more sense. If you have seen our show before and you're ready to jump into the action, head over to this timestamp to get into the battle. With some minor variations, casual and online play have basically the same rules. Because tournaments have lots of players and a limited amount of time, the rules for tournament play have some significant differences. Today we're going to be looking at tournament play for the 40th Anniversary Edition. There are 3 big rules differences that you need to know. Number 1, players bid for sides, and rather than a random draw, if both players wish to play the same side, they'll start a bidding process that when completed may allow players accepting a bid to place additional units on the map prior to the start of the game. A good bid and the placement of those units can make a huge difference in the game. A while back we made a video that lays out all the rules for bidding. If you want to know more about that, you can follow this link right here. Number 2, the Anniversary Edition comes with 2 different available scenarios, 1941 and 1942. In tournament play, we use the 1942 scenario. However, national objectives and research and development are excluded from the game, but the optional fighter, escort, and interceptor rule is in effect. Lastly, and most importantly, number 3, tournament games have a very specific time limit and win conditions. In the case of the Anniversary Edition, the game ends at the end of 6 hours of play. The team with the most victory cities at the end of the allowed time wins. The Anniversary Edition features 18 victory cities. If time runs out and each side controls 9 victory cities, we go to a tiebreaker. In tournament play, the tiebreaker is always the amount of IPC production at the end of play. So, as you can imagine, that changes the strategies quite a bit. Now, that isn't to say that tournament strategies won't work in casual online play, but their target is a bit different. The time limit shifts the goal to controlling more victory cities than your opponent when the time expires, rather than the stated victory conditions in the rulebook. In Anniversary, that means controlling 10 or more victory cities when the clock runs out. This rule set lends itself to much more aggressive strategies and can be a ton of fun. Just something to keep in mind as we follow the action. A quick disclaimer. I did my best to recreate the games as accurately as possible, but things happen in the heat of a game and during the recreation process that may have caused some of the minor details to get lost. Still, I'm confident that any minor discrepancies wouldn't have made any significant difference to the outcome of the game. Also, the pictures are going to have the different colored chips offset like this. This was done intentionally to make it easier to see. In reality, they stack just fine. All right, that's enough for now. You'll pick up the rest along the way. Let's get the 2024 Axis and Allies World Championships underway. All right, friends, it's time for that quarterfinal match, but I can't do this, of course, without my fine feathered friend, Mr. Doug Thorpe. Please welcome him to the show.
Hey, Gary, thanks for having me. Excited to be here as always.
And we're thrilled to have you. All right, so in this match, we're playing against, well, I'm not playing. Be really clear, I'm not playing in this match. It is Doug and Charles versus Keith and Dave. And Charles was also playing in the global tournament at the same time, so his attention was split between both matches. We'll have coverage of that global match that Charles was also playing in a little bit later down the road in a separate video. But for now, Doug, what was your thinking going into this match?
I was excited, won first round. We won pretty strong with the Allies, but this I was nervous. Charles, great partner, but he was really involved in that global match, running a lot of the strategy for that. And so I had very little of his time in this. I think he was maybe around for the first half of round one and then a couple of consults throughout. And that was really about it. So I was nervous kind of playing solo against two seasoned, experienced players. I'd never played Dave before, but I've played Keith and he's won some and I've won some and he's a strong player. So I was feeling good, but a little nervous and not liking the feeling of flying mostly solo.
Yeah, I get that. So if you watched our videos from last year where Doug and I played and won the World Championship, we were playing 1942 Second Edition. Now, this year in 2024, the World Championship was settled over the Anniversary Edition, which was released in 2024 by Renegade Game Studios, celebrating the 40-year anniversary of the launch of the original Axis and Allies game in 1984 from Milton Bradley. Now, if you're familiar with 1942 Second Edition, this game is very, very similar with some key differences. And Doug, I wonder if you could take us through those.
Yeah, I'll just try to hit the highlights and not go into all the details. One of the biggest differences is Italy is a playable power, obviously on the side of the Axis, and so they have a pretty significant presence in the Mediterranean. They start small but have the potential to get big. China is also kind of its own power. It's played alongside of the United States, but they make independent moves, independent combat, and though they don't collect IPCs, they get infantry based on the number of territories that they have. So they get one infantry for every two territories they control rounded down. And again, they're played in parallel with the United States. A couple of other pretty significant, I would say, points are there's no factory on the board in India for the United Kingdom, and that's pretty significant. There's also really no UK Navy off of Australia. So like that Anzac presence, that Navy that is key to what I like to do in 42 if I'm the Allies, is not present on the board. It's also significant that it's pretty hard for the Germans to hit the British fleet off of England in the first round. There's a lot more fleet presence in the Atlantic with Britain, and the battleship destroyer that's in that classic place off of England itself is harder to get to. So those are just a few high level things. One other thing that's really interesting is Russia starts with a bomber in this version. They have a fighter and a bomber instead of two fighters, as in most other versions. So it makes for some interesting changes and a lot of fun gameplay.
To me, a key difference is that Japan goes first when you're playing the 1942 scenario in this game. There's a 1941 scenario that has a different turn order, but in tournament play, we play the 1942 scenario. And in that edition, the Japanese go first, which gives them a big initiative, particularly on the UK Navy that's sitting off the coast of India. There are a couple of really choice targets for the Japanese starting off. But that's enough for now, and we'll cover more of this kind of as we go through, but I wanted everybody to kind of have a quick look at how this is different if you're familiar with the 1942 Second Edition version. All right, so without any further ado, let's jump right into this game.
Let's do it.
When you play Axis and Allies at Gen Con, who's going to play which side is determined by a bid. Doug, can you tell us how that bid went in your game?
Yeah, the bid in this game ended up being 4 to the Axis. I pitched that to the other team, and they took it. So Keith and Dave ended up choosing the Axis, and they got to put $4 worth of material on the board in a place where they already had units starting. And they chose to put an artillery in French Indochina to start the game off.
Okay, I like that position. It certainly gives them the option to go after that American fighter that's in Yunnan. I wonder about putting it in Burma instead and making a first round push at Calcutta. I'd be curious what the math looked like for that. But in this particular instance, they landed in French Indochina, Thailand, and moved on to their purchase. They started with 2 transports, a tank, and a bomber. For their combat moves, they went after the fighter in Yunnan with 2 infantry and artillery, a couple of fighters, and the bomber coming in from Japan. The transport brought down a guy in a tank to join one of the guys coming in from Kiangsu to do battle in Fujian. And of course, they went after the UK fleet in 35 with just about everything they could reach there. I think it's interesting that a fighter starts on the island of Formosa. It seems like kind of
Yeah.
an unusual place for a fighter to be. And it happens
Yep.
to be exactly 4 moves to get from Formosa to 35, which is the maximum range of the fighter. So it either has to end its turn in 35 on the carrier, assuming the carrier survives, or it will be taken as a casualty in any return fire. I thought this was a clever way to maximize the movement of that fighter. And we saw that technique again as they went after kind of a modified Pearl Harbor attack. The fighter from Japan comes down to 53 to engage in the battle using all 4 movement points, and the carrier is in 51. So it couldn't move to 51. So if it survives, that carrier would be obligated then to move into 53. So they're actually banking on taking at least 1 hit from the defending destroyer, carrier, and fighter. Because if they don't take a hit, that carrier is going to get sucked into 53 and be in range of all of those American units. When we look at the conduct combat, they did get their wish. The Americans got 2 hits in return, so they took the fighter and the destroyer as casualties. In Yunnan, they were able to take out the 2 infantry and the fighter, losing 1 infantry there, it looks like. And in Season 35, they took a bit of a shellacking here. The Americans got 3 hits. 1 went to the battleship, of course, and then the other 2 went to take out 2 fighters there, which is actually a pretty good result for the UK in that battle. Doug, any thoughts about how the Japanese combat went? Any surprises?
Yeah, not particularly. I mean, I was very pleased to get 3 fighters. I feel like that's pretty huge for the Allies to hit that often. I would have loved for the battle in Yunnan to have gone a little bit better, but they put in pretty overwhelming odds against me, so didn't really expect to pull that out. But yeah, I was pretty pleased with how it went.
For non-combat, the carrier came from 51 into 61 to catch a fighter. Some guys landed in French Indochina, Thailand. Of course, the fighter landed in 35. For their mobilization, of course, they've only got 1 place to mobilize, which is in Tokyo. So all of that landed there. They've got the battleship and 2 transports there now with, looks like 4 infantry, a tank, and an artillery, and now that fresh bomber. All in all, I think that was a pretty good opener for Japan. Any thoughts, Doug?
I think it was a good opening. I was glad that I got the 3 fighters. And I did think a bomber purchase on round 1 was a little interesting with Japan. I mean, they don't really know which direction I'm going to go. I may not even know if I'm going Atlantic against Germany or Pacific against Japan at this point in the game. So I do think a bomber on round 1 is an interesting purchase. So it'd be interesting to see how that turns out for them.
And that is the end of their turn. That takes us over to the Soviets. As we look at their first purchase, this is Doug's first move here. He picks up 4 infantry, an artillery, and a tank. For his combat, he makes a pretty heavy push into eastern Ukraine, a moderate push into Belarusia, and then decides to leave Ukraine alone in this opening battle.
I am going heavy into eastern Ukraine, but I'm not taking everything in there. One of the reasons is I'm trying to leave the possibility of a strafe open. I really am not sure that I want all of my armor there. So I'm hitting it with enough that I'm going to try to get about 3 or 4 hits, but hopefully not get everything in that territory so that I can strafe it and retreat back to Caucasus or Russia. Similar to Belarusia, I'd be okay with a strafe there, even though I'd like to get that territory, wipe those men out. But if that doesn't work out, I'm also okay with a strafe there. I feel like in this version, there's a lot more distance between Berlin and Moscow as far as territories, not just east and west, but north and south. And so you don't want to fan yourself out too thin with your Russian troops in this one.
Sound advice. So how did it work out? Looks like you picked off one guy in Belarusia and then retreated everyone to Archangel, but you did wipe the floor with them in eastern Ukraine. It looks like you took out all of their units and lost 2 infantry of your own. That does put all of your units, most of your offensive units anyway, in eastern Ukraine. We'll be watching that carefully on the Germans' turn to see if they decide to get froggy with that. When we look at your non-combat, it looks like everyone starts to walk west. The only exception is we left 4 guys in Yakut and the 3 guys walking from Buryatia into that territory right there. My Russian's terrible. After we mobilize, we drop 1 guy into Caucasus and the rest move into Moscow. Also during non-combat, the sub moved from C-Zone 4 over into C-Zone 2 to join the UK fleet.
A couple notes about my movement here. I probably would have sent the guys from Kazakh into China to support China, but because the rest of my units were moved forward into eastern Ukraine, I felt like I needed to support Caucasus a little bit more by moving those guys in there. So it's not exactly how I wanted this round to go. Maybe I pushed a little heavy into eastern Ukraine, but I felt like I needed to protect the units that were in there.
Looks like the end of the Soviets' turn, which takes us over to the Germans' opening move. For their purchase, they start with 3 infantry, 4 artillery, and a bomber. They do like their bombers over there. For their combat move, they sent 2 fighters and a bomber and the destroyer into C-Zone 12 to take out the cruiser and the destroyer that are there. The 2 subs head up to C-Zone 1 to take out the cruiser and the transport that is there. On the Eastern Front, they stepped into Karelia from Finland to try to take that over because it's undefended. But otherwise, they did not attack the units in eastern Ukraine, nor did they attack Caucasus, both of which surprised me. I'm a fan. If you're playing the Axis, you need to be playing aggressive. And this seemed like a really passive choice to me. Were you surprised by this?
I was a little surprised. I figured they would hit eastern Ukraine and go for my tank stack. I was glad that they didn't. I mean, the trouble is, I can kind of see why they don't, because if they go into eastern Ukraine and then I counterattack, they either expose a bunch of their tanks or lose a lot of the infantry that they have. So I kind of get why they don't, but I probably would have gone after those tanks if I'd been them.
So how to go out for them? Of course, they took Karelia. That wasn't a problem. They took out the units in C-Zone 12, but they did lose the destroyer at the same time. And they took out the cruiser and the transport in C-Zone 1 without any trouble. Total losses this time, the Axis lose their 8 and the Allies lose 39. Now for non-combat, they've got a lot of units to move around here. I'll save you the spaghetti mapping. This is how it ended up. Basically everything marching to the east for the most part. Big stack in eastern Poland, 1 guy in Belarusia, 1 guy in Ukraine, just kind of as bumpers. They did make the choice to use the transport in C-Zone 13 to move the infantry and the tank from France into Morocco, Algeria. Which I think is interesting. I guess they're protecting the fighter that was obligated to land there because it had used 3 moves.
Yeah, I think I was surprised that both fighters landed there. I mean, if you're worried about protecting Morocco, why not just put both fighters in there?
When they mobilize, of course, everything's got to go into Berlin. That's the 3 infantry, the 4 artillery, and the bomber. When we stack it all up, they've got a couple of bombers, a couple of fighters in Berlin, along with a stack of land units. Poland's looking really strong. Eastern Poland's looking really strong. Baltic's got a pretty good stack in it, and then the rest is just kind of speed bumps. Over to the UK's turn. Doug, you want to talk us through what your plan is for this move?
So I'm trying to decide on my buy. Again, in this version, you don't start with a complex in India. And so even though I don't love splitting my focus, I think I have to take the IPCs and put them into a complex in India to get a movement down there. But I also feel like I need to bolster my fleet in the Atlantic. I have that battleship and destroyer up there, so I choose to go with the complex and the aircraft carrier in order to do those 2 things.
For your combat moves, what did you opt to do?
I decided to go after the German fleet that's in the Baltic. I kind of went back and forth on this. I know you're risking, potentially a fighter, I guess 2 if they get lucky with the rolls, but I feel like getting rid of that cruiser, destroyer, and transport is worth it. But I feel like if I'm going to build a fleet up there, they're already building up an air force. If they have that navy as well and can bring it out and do a attack on my fleet with all those naval units to soak hits and then protect their air force, I feel like I've got to get rid of that fleet. So I just went after it. Yeah, in addition to that, they left Burma open, so I felt like I should walk in and take that. No reason not to. There's not really an imminent threat against India at this point, and I think it's worth putting a guy there to get the IPCs and force them to commit some units if they want to take it back.
I do like free territories for sure. When we get to conducting combat, Season 5 went okay. You did get rid of the sea units that you could destroy. Of course, there are no UK destroyers in range here, so they couldn't hit the sub, but the Germans did fire back and take out one of the fighters. Of course, they stepped into Burma with no problem, and total combat losses this time takes us to 27 for the Axis and just 10 for the Allies, so pretty good math here. Non-combat, those air units from C-Zone 5, of course, head back to C-Zone 6. The transport in C-Zone 2 jumps over to 1, cruising right over those subs that are there, pick up a guy and a tank and move them over to the UK. Non-combat in the Indian Ocean was pretty interesting. The destroyer from 15 comes out to 34. The fighter from Australia comes up and lands in India. The Egyptian units, the tank moves out and heads all the way over to Persia. The guy in the artillery in Transjordan move over. Two guys move from Egypt into Transjordan. The guys walk up to Rhodesia, and the transport comes around and sits in 28. I'm interested in this move of the transport to 28. It puts it in range of the fighter, but it almost feels like a dare, right? Because if they go out to get it, it puts them so far out of position.
That's exactly what I was doing. I would give away those 7 IPCs and that transport to have that carrier in C zone 29 or 33. So daring them to see if they'll come and get me.
When we go to mobilize, of course, that industrial complex is going in India and the carrier into Sea Zone 2 to join the fleet that is there. Unfortunately, it doesn't have any fighters on it yet, but maybe there are some friendly fighters that can come and help out. We'll find out about that in a little bit. Looking across the rest of the UK's turn here, it seems like they're in a pretty reasonable position, I think. So they've got some options in the Atlantic and in the Pacific, so should be interesting. Over to the Italians for their turn. They decide to purchase 2 infantry and save 4. They start with 10 IPCs, so this is 6 of them, so they saved 4 for next turn. For their combat move, they decide to come at Transjordan with the battleship, the 2 cruisers. Only one of the cruisers and the battleship are going to be able to do the offshore shot because they're only offloading 2 land units. They can only have 2 offshore shots in this particular game. So they're offloading the guy and the tank headed at Transjordan and the 2 guys there. Plus the 2 infantry and the fighter are coming into Egypt to try to pick off the guy that are there. When we look at how it all turned out, in Transjordan, they were victorious, though they did lose 1 infantry. In Egypt, they were able to take it for free. Total losses this time for the Axis, they lose only 6. The Allies lose 9 this time. For non-combat, they send 2 guys up into Paris. They send 1 guy marching into Bulgaria, Romania, and the tank moves it all the way up to join the party in eastern Poland while the fighter lands in Libya. They mobilize their 2 infantry into Rome, and that is how they end their turn. They're starting to spread out a little bit and take some control. There should be markers there on Egypt and Transjordan. My apologies. So when they collect their IPCs this time, they started with 10. They're up 3. So that takes them to collecting 13. They saved 4 from last time, so they got 17 IPCs in the bank. Doug, any thoughts about Italy's turn?
Yeah, a couple thoughts. I haven't played Anniversary Edition as much, and so I'm not as familiar with some of the nuances with Britain, and they have a good stack in Egypt. I feel like you have to get that stuff out of there or it's just going to get landed on and bombarded. But I've gone back and forth, like instead of you moving all of that stuff to Persia, should I move that to Transjordan so they can't land there as heavy and kill your 2 guys? But it's like it's that balance between the most they can bring in is 2 units, so the most I could kill is 2 units, but with their bombardment, they could get lucky and hit 4 of my units. So it kind of seems better to get things off of the coast there, but I'm still working through some of those details. I wish that I hadn't lost those 2 territories and they hadn't got me out of there as quickly. I was hoping to create some speed bumps to slow them down a little bit. It didn't work out that way. So still working through some of those nuances there.
Over to the Americans' first turn, and there it is, my friends. In case if you've seen our previous videos, you'll know that this is a favorite purchase for Doug, the 2 carriers and the fighter for the Americans, famously in the 42nd edition version, referred to as the Thorpe Thump, or the beginning of the Thorpe Thump anyway.
Even though this is the quintessential build for the Thorpe Thump, I actually think whether at this point America is going kill Germany first or kill Japan first, I kind of think this is still the best build for it. Germany has a really big air force, and you're going to need probably at least two carriers out there in order to protect any sort of Atlantic fleet. So, even though, again, it is the kind of typical build for going one direction, I think it can work both ways on this version.
For combat moves, they sent the destroyer up from Season 10 into Season 1, along with all of the air units that could reach to take out the two subs that are there. They go to clear out the riffraff in Season 53 with the sub, a fighter, and a bomber. The Japanese sub is going to have the option to submerge because there aren't any American destroyers in this theater at the moment. One thing really important to remember in that Pearl attack, that's the only American destroyer in the Pacific. So once that's gone, you're going to need to be either buying another one or you're going to need to pay attention to any Japanese subs that might be roaming around here. So when we conduct combat, they were able to clear out the subs in Season 1, but they did take the destroyer with them. But in 53, they did take out the cruiser, and I guess they submerged there because it's still there. But it doesn't look like the cruiser hit and the return fire, so the American sub is still there. Total losses for the Axis here, they lose 24 and the Allies lose 8.
I probably went a little heavy into the North Atlantic with America, but I did have the intent of landing the American fighters on the British carrier to protect it because the bombers can reach it. But in retrospect, I wonder if I should have just went in with one fighter. I don't really think that I needed both of them there, and at least has the potential to put my fighters out of position for a little while. So looking back, I wish I hadn't done that.
When we get to non-combat, the two fighters, as advertised, land on the UK carrier in Season 2. The transports move up to Season 1 along with the land units from the DC metro area. The two bombers come around the Horn and land in western United States, and the fighter from Honolulu comes up and lands in 56. The bomber that started the game in the western United States has also moved out to the Hawaiian Islands. The destroyer that starts in Season 20 comes up to 56. It's time to mobilize. Those two carriers and the fighter do go into Season 56 off the coast of San Francisco, which puts a carrier, two fighters, and three bombers in range of Season 62. Very important to keep track of that. Over to China, they've got 5 territories, so we're going to set 2 Chinese infantry units aside to place during the mobilization phase. They didn't opt to do any combat this time. Instead, they decided to throw a party in Ningxia. I'm sure I'm slaughtering the pronunciation of that. But when it's over, they've got 6 infantry there, and they are mobilizing the 2 infantry, one in Xikang and the other in Hubei. And that is the end of the Americans' turn and the end of round 1. Doug, any thoughts about how all this played out?
I decided to go after Japan with obviously my fleet build. I felt like I could take advantage of them losing 3 fighters in the first round. That was a big thing that lent my ultimate decision that way. Normally, like in 42nd, I bring the transports through the Panama Canal into the Pacific theater. I chose to leave them in the Atlantic to hopefully support some British harassment in Europe there. So we'll see how that turns out.
At the end of round 1, it's time for our very first Renegade Roundup recap. This round lasted just over an hour, leaving about 5 hours on the clock. And with the German capture of Karelia, the Victory City count is now tied 9-9. That takes us over to round 2, which starts with the Empire of Japan. For their purchasing of units, they start with 3 infantry, an artillery, a destroyer, and yet another bomber. For their combat moves, they go after the guy in Hubei and the guy in Burma. They also stepped in and took Buryatia for free. And they are successful in clearing the decks with those guys. And losing no units in the process, the Allies lose 5 IPCs worth of material here. We call the Chinese infantry worth 2 because for every 2 territories they control, they get 1 infantry. So rough estimate here, you can say the Chinese infantry are worth 2 IPCs each. For non-combat, they've got a lot happening. So this is their starting position. And again, I'll save you the spaghetti mapping of all of this. But in the end, they come down to Season 36 with a battleship, the carrier with 1 fighter. The 2 transports that they bought in the first round brought down an infantry, an artillery, and a tank to French Indochina. They walk out of Fujian. In 62, they end with a battleship, a carrier, and 2 fighters on it. And then the sub jumped back to Season 50 now that destroyer has come into the Pacific theater. So they've got something to pay attention to now there. Pressure starting to mount on Calcutta.
Yeah, not feeling great about that. They've clearly made a move south. I mean, they can hit me with 8 land units and at least 4 air units right off the bat. So that doesn't feel great. I do have a couple fighters there. I have more guys coming in from Persia, but yeah, it's concerning for sure. They're putting a lot of pressure there. And if I lose India, that's really bad.
I think the other thing to keep in mind here is that at the moment the Suez Canal is open, and that Italian fleet can also swing through with the battleship, the two cruisers, and their transport with a couple of guys on it. So they can do 1-2 Italy Japan on the UK, which would make it even more tenuous. So there's a couple of things to kind of balance here at the same time, really kind of early in the game. They mobilized the units, of course, into Tokyo, which gives them quite a reasonable presence there in 62. Were you eyeballing this and doing the math?
You know me too well. Yeah, I was eyeballing it for sure. With the addition of the destroyer, I think it's total no go. Again, mentioned landing the fighters on the UK carrier early, or if I would have had one of those fighters and maybe they hadn't added the destroyer, probably going for it. But I think given the circumstances, it's just too little. I feel like if you set yourself back too quickly in the first round with America, Japan could just crank out 2 more fighters the next round. By the time you get there with more stuff, you could be in a lot of trouble. So
Yeah, there's a time to strike, there's a time to hold on. So felt like that was the time to hold back a little bit. I agree with you there. We pass the action over to the Soviets. And for their purchases, they buy 4 infantry, 2 artillery, and a tank. Doug, can you take us through this?
yeah, I think it's worth building tanks with Russia in this version just because they cost 5 and they defend well. So I don't mind slipping a tank in there every round. Gary, I see you shaking your head at me.
I disagree. I feel like
Yeah,
yes, 5 is better for tanks. That's a better price for tanks, and that certainly makes them more cost effective. But for the Soviets in particular, to me, infantry and fighters and the occasional artillery for the Russians is the best way to forestall the German wave, because they can send out some infantry for cheap, come with the fighters and the other air units to do the damage, and then move those air units back and out of danger.
yeah, I don't disagree with the possibility on the first round, but again, it's the fighters versus tanks. Like I'm slipping a tank in every round. I can't slip a fighter in every round. I wouldn't have any land units after about round 3. So I think it's worth building a tank in there occasionally.
All right, so talk us through your combat here.
Yeah, so I just wanted to take those 2 territories, Belarusia and the Ukraine, try to have some buffers there, not commit very much, and just hold back and just try to stockpile my men and artillery and tanks and play defensive. So I want to pick off those 2 so that their tanks can't blitz through and get either one of my complexes or victory cities.
So when we moved to conduct combat, looks like you were able to take both territories, but they did make you pay for it. You lost an infantry in Belarusia and another in Ukraine. Total losses pretty even, 6 and 6 for the Axis and the Allies this time. Let's see what your non-combat move looked like. Looks like the guys from Yakut are coming back to Sherebet, and then everyone else is moving west towards Moscow. The bomber moves back to Russia. Everyone, except for one guy, evacuates eastern Ukraine. It looks like most of the party is headed to Stalingrad. A couple of guys coming from Caucasus end up moving down to Persia, which I think is an interesting choice. Gives you a little bit of flexibility there in India. When we go to mobilize, you got the tank, the artillery, and the guy coming into Moscow. 3 infantry and an artillery into Caucasus.
You're going to notice a pattern of little things I missed. I think I should have moved that artillery or the AA gun rather back. Just a lot of little things I missed this game. It was a little sloppy. That's an example of it right there.
So that is the end of the Soviets' turn. We're over to the Germans. And for their purchase, they get 3 infantry, 3 artillery, a tank, and yet another bomber. They love the bombers over there on the Axis. Then they do something a little sneaky.
Yeah, it's sneaky for sure. Slick move. I like it.
The UK, with their focus on taking out the units in C-Zone 5, failed to take out the transport in C-Zone 13, which created this opportunity for the Germans to pop out there and to take Brazil. And they are now working on their Samba. They take 2 guys and a fighter into Belarusia, 2 guys and a bomber into eastern Ukraine, 2 guys and a bomber into Ukraine, but no one into Archangel. which is again kind of surprising. And basically, they're just making light pushes across the map here. When we look at how the combat turned out, of course, they were successful in taking Brazil, and they are partying in Rio. And they were a clean sweep across the front lines there. It looks like they lost one infantry. That's right. So the Axis lose a total of 3 IPCs. The Allies lose 9 this time. For non-combat, again, I'll save you all of the spaghetti mapping, but suffice to say that everything moved to the east until you get to that dead man zone. And basically, there's a big party in eastern Poland, and now a considerable party in Karelia. Also for non-combat, they moved into Egypt. The 2 tanks moving over from Morocco, Algeria. They go to mobilize. Of course, now they can mobilize into Karelia, where they place a guy and an artillery. Everyone else into Germany. And that is the end of the Germans' turn. In this round, they collected 42 IPCs, which takes us to UK's second turn. Doug, what are you thinking here?
I'm thinking a couple of things. The Germans building a bomber every round is problematic for a UK Atlantic fleet, plus all the fighters that they have. So far in the game at this point, with all the little piddly back and forth, infantry and a bomber attacking, infantry defending battles in Germany and Russia, and even down in China, that little battle of attrition here and there is not going very well for the Allies. So I need to hold on to India. They're looking at a big push, so I have to build something there. But I think I need to continue to build on that fleet. I mean, I have a decent fleet going in the Atlantic. And so I want to put something out there to protect it and try to start putting some pressure on Germany so they can't focus everything on Russia.
So this must be why you bought 3 infantry, another carrier, and a fighter. For combat moves, you used the transport that was off the coast of South Africa, picked up the infantry, the artillery, along with the 2 fighters coming in from India to try to close the Suez Canal by taking Transjordan. In the Atlantic, you decided to sink that transport that was so sneaky, dirty, over in Sea Zone 18. Of course, you were successful in taking out the undefended transport, and you were successful in taking Transjordan and losing no units this time. To non-combat, of course, the bomber goes back. The fighter that was in the UK moves out to Sea Zone 2. That'll be on the carrier when it comes around. The UK units that were in Persia move into India to prepare for the defense of that. When we go to mobilize those units, the carrier, of course, is going to go up into Sea Zone 2 with the fighter. And the 3 infantry, of course, will go down to India. When we put all that together, that fleet in Sea Zone 2 is starting to look pretty healthy. It's 2 full carriers, a battleship, a destroyer, 1 transport, and of course the bomber in London. So at the end of the UK's turn, let's take a quick look at what it looks like for Japan to attack India. When we look at the math, they are actually 67% to take Calcutta if they were to attack now. But I think there may be some developments that happen in between here and there. So let's see how that turns out. Over to the Italians. They start the turn with 17 IPCs because they saved 4 from last time. They use it to purchase 2 infantry, an artillery, and a new transport. So a second transport for the Italians in the Med can mean some trouble for the Allies here. So for their combat moves, they use the 2 guys that they have in Egypt. One goes down to Anglo-Egypt, Sudan. The fighter from Libya pops out to pick off that transport in Sea Zone 34. And of course, they're successful in both of those. No dice to roll. They capture there and destroying the 7 IPC valued Allied transport. And then they non-combat their fleet all back into Sea Zone 14, using the transport to move a guy and a tank from the European theater down into Libya. They mobilized the 2 infantry and the artillery and the transport there. And now they've got at least 3 transports worth of guys, plus the guys in Libya that they could move if they really wanted to. So it seems like there's maybe a little bit of a mismatch there. Am you seeing something I'm not seeing?
I mean, maybe they're thinking they want to have some stuff to go into France if I hit France, and some stuff to go south into Africa.
Certainly an option. All right, over to US's second turn. Talk us through what you're doing here.
I need to figure out what I want to do to put some pressure on Japan, since they're putting a lot of pressure on India. They are building bombers, just like Germany is. They build a bomber every round. So I'm going to need more defense for my fleet. I would love to have started transitioning to some other units, but I feel like I have to defend my fleet. So I'm going to have to try to build more fleet to defend it, and then see if there's a way I can get those fighters off of the UK carrier and leave UK to fend for themselves in the Atlantic.
You kick it off by purchasing a carrier, 2 fighters, and an artillery. No combat this time, so it's all non-combat from here on out. So the 2 cruisers popped out from Season 1 over to 2, bringing all the Americans over to party in northern UK there. Scotland, Ireland. It's a party over there. It's very nice. Now we've got 2 carriers with 4 fighters, because the 2 fighters left the UK carrier in Season 2 and came across, flying over Canada to land into Season 56. And the 2 bombers also came from the Western United States and landed in Hawaii, giving them some more reach there. So now when we go to mobilize, we've got these guys coming in here. Everything is going to go to the Western Front. Now, I know that you like to have all of the carriers and the fighters like in a big pile and a mess, but I couldn't take it anymore at this point as I was taking the pictures. So there you go. You get 3 carriers and 6 fighters in Season 56. Live with it.
Thanks, Gary.
You bet. You bet. Keeping
I
things
don't like
clean.
it. I like my flat tops, man.
Back to the Chinese. They do not have any combat this time. They take their 6 guys. They move back to Qinghai. They place the 1 guy in Ningxia. When I abbreviate this, it's NIN. So every time I say it, it's 9 Inch Nails. I don't know if that's helpful to anybody out there, but that's what it is. And that is the end of the US's turn. That takes us to our Renegade recap. Round 2 lasted just over an hour, leaving 3 hours and 52 minutes on the clock. The victory count is still tied 9-9. On to round 3. Round 3 over to Japan. For Japan's 3rd round purchase, they purchase a carrier, a fighter, and 4 infantry this time. No bomber. No bomber this time, which is a refreshing change. For their combat, they do go after the guys in 9 Inch Nails territory and in Sikang, with 2 infantry, a tank, and then the 2 bombers come with the 1 guy. They are successful in taking everybody out and appear to lose nothing, so the Allies lose 4 IPCs this time with the 2 Chinese units. For their non-combat, though, they regrouped in Season 62. They sent the 1 transport from 62 down into 61 with 2 guys into Kwangtung, and they also moved everything out of Burma except for 1 guy.
And they chose not to go after India, which I thought was interesting. I really thought that they would hit India.
I don't know if they did the math differently than we did. I think they were favored in it, but maybe they were starting to get afraid of the American fleet coming over and felt like they needed to regroup in 62. I'm not sure. I think I probably would have gone for it, but I am a crazy person.
I wish they had attacked, because I actually think the Russian counterattack would have annihilated them. I would have sent all of those tanks down that Gary doesn't like, and the 2 infantry from Persia.
Yeah, and maybe they saw that calculation as well, where the Russians could come down with the tanks and their air units and help to clear the way there. So it certainly would have been an expensive battle for them, and whether they could hold it or not, I guess, was the primary question. But Japanese mobilized. Of course, they're mobilizing into Tokyo, which gives them their 3rd carrier. They've only got 5 fighters this time, though. So all in, the Japanese at the end of their 3rd turn collect 41 IPCs over to the Soviets for their 3rd turn. They stick with what's working for them. They buy 4 infantry, 2 artillery, and a tank. For combat moves, they look to make another light exchange into eastern Ukraine and to Ukraine itself, and they were successful. They lost 1 infantry in Ukraine, but were successful in taking eastern Ukraine and Ukraine. The Axis lose 9 IPCs with the 3 infantry, and the Allies lose 3 with the loss of theirs. For non-combat, they land the fighter back into Caucasus. They send 1 artillery south into Persia, and everyone else starts marching west. When we mobilize the new units, they put the guy in a tank into Caucasus and the rest up into Moscow. I was trying to look at this as I was putting it together and wondered about the math for Moscow.
I felt pretty good, or else I wouldn't have moved the tanks to the south. And, I do have a substantial counterattack force there if they were to take it. Obviously, you'd never want to lose your capital, but if they went in and I counterattacked, they would lose all their tanks, and potentially they wouldn't have another opportunity to really hit me again this game.
On to Germany 3, and they purchase 1 infantry, 1 artillery, and 7 big tanks. They are on the move. For their combat moves, they make a light push into Ukraine, they make a light push into eastern Ukraine, and they make a light push into Archangel. And the guys in Egypt push over into Transjordan. How did it turn out for them? Looks like success all around. They took out the guy in Archangel. They took out the units that were in eastern Ukraine and in Transjordan. They lost 3 infantry and a tank to do it. This is actually a pretty reasonable Allied response. It looked like there's some pretty reasonable dice here. For non-combat, they moved the 2 guys in from Egypt, from Libya into Egypt. And again, saving you all the spaghetti mapping here. More guys into eastern Poland, more guys into Karelia, and the bomber back to Berlin. And it looks like an additional unit or 2 over into Paris. They place the infantry, the artillery into Karelia, and the 7 tanks land heavily into Germany. And so that means that they end the turn with 45 IPCs this time. On to UK3. Tell me what you're thinking here, Doug.
I feel like I'm in a dilemma. I'm not feeling super great about my position here. I feel like things are starting to close in on Russia a little bit. I'm not doing much with the UK, which I don't like. And so I start thinking, well, I have a pretty similar fleet, like fleet parity with Japan, and the entire, South Pacific is wide open. So what if Britain lends a little bit of aid to America, and I have some fighters down there? What if I add a carrier down there, and then I bolster my Atlantic fleet a little bit and start moving there with some transports? So I build a carrier, a fighter, and a transport, thinking the fighter and transport go in the Atlantic and the carrier goes in the Pacific off of India. So do a light push into Burma. I think in retrospect, I should have went ahead and hit France this round, even though it would have been a light hit. I think that I need to start wearing down their units there and drawing units off of Russia. But I think I just was too passive with Britain.
Looks like for non-combat, the 2 fighters came out of Burma, landed in C-Zone 35. And we placed the carrier down there, picks up those 2 fighters. We put the other fighter onto the carrier in C-Zone 2, along with the other transport.
The game was getting into a weird place right now because usually this is a longer tournament than 1942 second edition. It's a 6-hour long tournament. And I was starting to really feel time pressure now with the Allies because I feel like I need 6 rounds minimum, maybe 7 with the Allies in this version. 5's just not going to cut it.
In the interest of time, we're going to step on the gas a little bit here. In Italy's third turn, they pushed into the Middle East and Africa and added a fighter to their arsenal. On US3, the Americans greened out the skies over the Solomon Islands and shifted the rest of the fleet south. They also splashed 3 destroyers and a fresh transport into C-Zone 56, which takes us to the end of Round 3 and the Renegade Roundup recap. With the continued occupation of Leningrad by the Axis, the Victory City count holds steady at 9-9. Round 3 took dead on an hour, leaving just under 3 hours on the clock. Over to Japan. On their 4th turn, they finished off the conquest of China, bolstered the defense of Manila, and shifted their fleet south to mirror the Americans. The Russians' 4th turn was their most aggressive yet. They made the same light pushes into the no man's land on their western front, but they also sent their stack of tanks out to avenge the Chinese, and their boldness paid off with a clean sweep of all of the enemy forces. Their purchases continued to grow the stacks in Moscow and Stalingrad in anticipation of the German assault. And as we look at the Germans' 4th turn, we can see the Russians are probably not going to have to wait much longer. They make some light pushes in the south, but bring 2 huge stacks to the doorstep of the Red Square. During non-combat, they brought that sub out of the Baltic and into the English Channel. They also continued to mount pressure in the Middle East. On UK4, they made a light push into Burma and continued to build up the North Atlantic Fleet in preparation of an attack on Europe. Orders from Rome on Italy 4 were to push into Persia and strengthen France. Mission accomplished. US4 again saw the greening of the skies, this time over the Caroline Islands and the targeting of the undefended transport off the coast of Manila. Let's get back to Doug and see what he was thinking here.
I'm convinced at this point that I'm only going to get one more move with the Americans. So I have to put myself in a position where I have a shot at one or multiple victory cities, just depending on what Japan does. So that's ultimately why I did this. I put the destroyer in C-Zone 60 to block. I sent the cruiser after the transport in C-Zone 50 to block there. That's because those were the only 2 units that could reach. The other destroyers came down from the coast of San Francisco. And so I have to put myself in a position to get a victory city or 2 and have a shot at the Japanese Navy if I'm only going to have one more move with America.
So that makes sense to me. If you think you're only going to get one more round in, then yeah, you've got to get yourself in a place with your land units to be able to attack a victory city. And right here, the easiest, of course, is Manila. And then you also might have a shot at Tokyo, depending on how they play it. Now, it sounds like you're concerned that you're about to run out of time, but looking at the video, and again, video gives us perfect hindsight. I can tell you that the clock right now is a little over 4 hours. And so there should be about 2 hours left. And rounds 5 and 6 should pretty easily fit, even maybe a round 7, depending on how quickly everyone plays, in those 2 hours. So it sounds like there may have been some confusion about how much time was remaining. And I can tell you, as somebody who has been to the Gen Con tournaments many times, it is a chaotic environment. And it is easy to kind of lose track of what's happening. So I know, because I was in this area, that right next to this table was an event that was 42nd edition, and that's got a 5-hour clock. The game that we're playing here has a 6-hour clock. Also right next to this game on the other side was the North Africa tournament, and that was using a 5-hour clock. So what I think might have happened here, and it sounds like, and Doug, correct me if I've got this wrong here, but it sounds like what might have happened is, as the tournament directors were coming around and making announcements as to how much time was remaining, I think it's possible that the players at this table, and maybe other tables in the anniversary event, misunderstood how much time was remaining and thought that there was only an hour left in their game when there was really 2 hours remaining. Does that sound like something that might be plausible here?
Yeah, I'll be honest. I don't know exactly what happened. You're absolutely right. I mean, I see it as the player's responsibility to know how much time is left. It's not on anybody else. You can go up to where the tournament directors sit. So I don't really know what the confusion was, but I do know that everybody at our table was under the impression that we might be able to slip in 2 rounds, but we might be looking at round 5 being our last round.
All right. So at the end of round 4, Doug, the Allied team here, believes that the game is going to end at the end of the 5th round. The current score is 9-9. So if the Allies if they can hold what they have and gain one more victory city at the end of the US's turn, they can win this game. If the game ends tied, if it ends 9-9, then it will come down to an IPC count. And at the moment, the Allies are collecting 85 IPCs and the Axis are collecting 104. At this point, the Allies have to hold everything that they've got and take one more in order to win at the end of the 5th round. So let's see how it goes. Kicking it into round 5. Japan, what do? They are going to buy 2 fighters, 5 infantry, and a tank. I think they realize now the jig might be up on Tokyo, so they're looking to build up the defense there. For combat, they decide to darken the skies over C-Zone 50 and that poor cruiser that's there, and the destroyer in C-Zone 60. They basically unleash the Japanese Air Force. They were successful in destroying both of those, and both of those units missed on the return fire. So this is the Allies losing 20 IPCs, the Axis losing 0. So for non-combat, they move a couple of bombers and a fighter back to Tokyo and consolidate the rest of the fleet in C-Zone 61, decide to hold the show there. They put some additional land units into Shanghai and into Hong Kong to shore up and to hopefully hold their own. Time for the Japanese to mobilize. They put their new infantry and air units and the tank into Tokyo. So I'm shocked here at the end of Japan's turn that they did not block C-Zone 50, which would have stopped you from having access to Shanghai or Hong Kong. They didn't block 60, which would have basically made it impossible for you to take Tokyo. You couldn't even attack Tokyo. I suppose you could get there with air units, but you couldn't get there with any transport, so you couldn't capture any of these victory cities. The only one that you'd be able to have access to is Manila.
Yeah, you could have done the carrier in one, the destroyer in the other, and then put, 6 or 7 fighters plus 2 transports worth of stuff in the Philippines. I think you could have literally shut down all 4 cities.
Yeah, that's the A move right there, is to land all the air units and the 2 transports worth of guys in Manila and just block 50 and 60 and say the game's over at 5, and that's the ball game.
Yeah, all the bombers to soak hits. You put all 4 bombers there. You
Right.
put, I think, 6. Did they build 1 fighter or 2 fighters? You put 6 or 7 fighters there.
Yeah.
I do think in retrospect, I do think there was at least a little bit of a question of whether we would have a round 6 or not. But yeah, it seems like they could have shut it down right here.
Yeah, so it's certainly an opportunity there to close the door on the Allies entirely, and it feels like they missed it. To Russia 5, let's see what we got going on over here. We've got a purchase of 4 infantry and 2 tanks. Now over to our combat move. We send a tank blitzing across China, taking out 9-inch nails and Xu Yang.
You got to have a landing field.
Right. That's a really good point. So this actually creates a landing zone for the American bombers that would
Yes.
be coming from the west. So, or coming from the east rather. The Russian sub decides to make a run at the Italian fleet because they think this is the end of the game. Then a couple of light attacks into Ukraine and eastern Ukraine to clear off a couple of the artillery that are there.
The idea here is to put Germany in a position where they can't take Stalingrad, and I can put most of my stuff in Russia, and then the only shot at Stalingrad would be the Italian fleet.
So let's look at the results of our combat. The sub, unfortunately, didn't make it and didn't seem to take anything with it, but it was a valiant effort from the valiant Russian Navy. So
I didn't even get a hit on that battleship. Nothing.
nothing. You got nothing. You get nothing and like it. But we did successfully take out the 2 artillery, one in eastern Ukraine and one in Ukraine. The Axis lose 8 IPCs. The Allies lose 6. Non-combat, we have 4 infantry and the artillery left in Caucasus, but it looks like the rest of the units moved up into Russia. The tanks moved back from Shanghai, leaving a pretty healthy stack. You've got 4 infantry and 2 tanks coming in for the max of 6 there. So taking us all the way up to 18 infantry and 8 tanks, 5 artillery. Seems pretty solid. Looking at the south here, we do have some Italians in Persia and in Transjordan that we need to pay attention to, as well as the German tank in Transjordan that might be able to do something. Over to the Germans. And it's at this point that everyone agreed that this was going to be the last round. There was a belief that there was only 40 minutes left in the game. And the way that the tournament rules read is you should not start an additional round unless you're confident that you'll be able to finish that round. So at this point, the entire group, mistakenly believing that they had only 40 minutes left, actually had an hour and 40 minutes left. But everyone at the table agreed that this was going to be the last round of play. And so they knew that they were going to be able to get through the 5th round, and then that was going to be the end of the game. 7 tanks and a bomber. It looks like the Germans have got some pretty serious options here. Let's take a quick look at the math. Looking at the German combat options, they've got some really interesting choices, the biggest of which, of course, is Moscow. It looks like the Germans, if they decide to pull the trigger on this attack, have got about an 80% probability of success. So that is a really strong option for them. I'm a big fan of the notion that anytime I've got 70% odds or better to go into a capital, I'm going. But let's see what other options they might have had. Oh, right. So we've got that tank that was down there in Transjordan that we were kind of keeping an eye on. He decides to swing that tank through Persia up into Caucasus and then send all of their available air units, which in this case is 3 fighters and 4 bombers, to swing at the land units that are there, which is 5 infantry, an artillery, and an AA gun. In this particular battle, when we look at the math for this, they're actually a 91% chance of success in this battle. So this is what they ended up doing, and I think it was their only combat. And the math held true. They were able to take out those land units, keeping the tank in place. They did lose 2 bombers and a fighter in exchange for the 5 infantry and the artillery. Some non-combat, big stack in Karelia. This makes this virtually impossible for the Allies to take. They do land the rest of the guys in Persia to avoid any kind of can opener that the Allies might be able to come up with for that tank to swing into Caucasus. So they also move everything into Paris because the transports for the UK are not in range of Berlin. They're up above in C Zone 2, so they're not going to be able to reach Berlin, but they could reach Paris. They could reach Karelia. Those are the only two victory cities that are in range at this point. So they have put pretty healthy stacks in both of those. They place a couple of extra tanks into Karelia. The rest go into Berlin. So that is where the Germans ended their game. Doug, tell us what happened here.
I did not see the tank blitz from Transjordan. I mean, should have seen it. Pulled that move myself many times. Fly the fighters over. I mean, that's basically what I do with America. You go in with the air, one or two land units to take the victory cities from Japan. But I didn't see that tank blitz through there. I'd assumed he was going into Russia, and when he laid that out, thought about that, and then put everything back and said, "I'll just go in here with the tank in the air," I was just like, "Oh my gosh, I cannot believe I didn't see it." So it's a great move from a good player, and it got him that victory city. So I'm in a tight spot now.
So the Allies are going to need, between the UK's turn and the Americans' turn, they're going to need to be able to find two victory cities that they can take. The UK is up next, and I don't know. It's pretty thin. We'll see how it plays out. Yeah, that's a really good move into Caucasus. I hats off
Yeah,
to Dave and
yeah,
Keith
that's
here.
very
That was a very, very
yeah.
good move. Over to the UK.
We had tried to verify the time left in the game and realized there wouldn't be enough for another move, so we just forego the buy this time. Didn't buy anything. I think it's a good example of what I was talking about last round. Like, if my fleet were in a different position, they couldn't have stacked the only two victory cities I could get to so strongly. They would have had to spread themselves more equally across four victory cities and would have actually had a better shot at one. But Karelia is totally untenable. I mean, I don't even know. They have like 12 or 14 tanks up there and some fighters. So France is really the only actual chance I have. So just for sake of time and trying to move things along, just go all in on France with everything that I have for the UK.
All right, so let's look at the math for the UK's valiant push into Paris. Their odds of success here are less than zero. This is not going to be a successful battle. But if they do enough damage here, it is possible that the Americans might be able to show up with their last 40 units and hopefully be able to do the job. And total combat losses here are substantial. So 68 for the Allies and 18 for the Axis. That is not what you're hoping for when the game is on the line. But let's see. Let's see where the rest of it goes. Non-combat, they don't have any fighters left, so there's no need to move those carriers down there. And they move the two fighters into India to try to protect that space and make sure that there isn't any last-minute push from the Italians. Speaking of, over to the Italians for their last turn. They decide not to buy anything. They send that last guy down to South Africa and pick up the Union South Africa for another two IPCs. They blitz back and forth into fresh West Africa to grab the complete set of the African territories, which is always nice. Tank blitz up from Persia into Kazakh and to Novosibirsk and picks up those four IPCs. So in case there was a tie, the Axis are picking up all of the available monies here. They decided to send that fleet around from 15 into 16 to pick up, to make an attack anyway on Ukraine. This is their only actual rolled combat this time, and they are successful in taking out the Russian infantry that is there. It seems like they took no losses, so it's just the three for the Allies there. No losses for the Axis. Non-combat, they land the fighter into Stalingrad and a couple more units into Italy to make sure that the Americans, aren't able to do really anything. And that is the end of the Italians' turn. US 5. This is where the rubber meets the road, as they say. They need two victory cities in order to bring home the hardware this time. No hardware. This is just quarterfinal match, but this is your last chance. Doug, take us through it.
Yeah, so I'm gonna attack Paris, but I feel like my chances are about zero. We talked about it a little bit earlier. Japan has left me some opportunities, but now I need two cities. So I can go at Tokyo and Manila, or I can go at Manila and Shanghai or Hong Kong. Hong Kong has too much in it. Shanghai's the softer target there. But if I'm going to use my bombers on the Solomon Islands, I have to fight through the fleet and hit Shanghai. So I try to do some calculations here. I have an infantry and an artillery on each of my transports. So obviously, a transport's going each direction with that. And then I just need to maximize my chances of taking those cities. So one of them has 4 infantry, so that's 8 defense. So I go in with an infantry and artillery and I think 2 fighters. So I have a slight advantage there. The other one has 2 infantry, and artillery, and a tank. So I go in with an infantry and artillery and 2 fighters, which leaves everything else to go after the Japanese Navy in Sea Zone 61. And so that's what I do. I mean, I go all in on 61 and a minimal forces to try to capture the territories.
All right, so these are the American combat moves. We're heading into France. We're heading to Manila. We got a big fight in 61 and then into Shanghai. Have to take 2 victory cities in order to win. Let's start with the surefire Paris. They've got 4 guys going into a wall of infantry and fighters and AA guns that are on fire, and it's not looking good for them. So Paris, not so much. They perish outside of Paris.
Hey, at least I finally used units in the game. They didn't just sit there in London the whole time, right?
Yes, they finally did find a purpose. So at least something to do with those transports and those guys. They haven't I haven't seen a lot of action in this game.
Yeah.
So over to Manila. They've got an infantry and artillery, 2 fighters versus 4 infantry. And in this particular battle, they're a 61% favorite to win, and they do bring home the bacon in that battle. So they did get their first victory city that they needed in that fight. So that is really, really exciting. Let's see what happened in Sea Zone 61. They've got about a coin flip here. So they're about 49% odds to win this territory outright, which would allow for the transport to move forward into Shanghai, and along with the air units there that are trying to take that last victory city in order to win the game. And we did get a little bit of a lucky break here. When we were shooting this, they did opt to put this last battle on a battle board, and we did catch it under camera. So I'm going to take you now to the actual rolls for the outcome of really this game. Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to see the dice roll, but I will give you the graphics and we'll be able to hear some of the conversation that goes here. So let's take you now tableside at Gen Con quarterfinal 2024. All right, so we've already rolled for the sub and that one missed. Those are the 1s and the 2s.
1 hit.
1 hit there.
2 3s and 4 4s.
One.
Probably 4.
So
Three.
1,
Three
2,
more hits.
I needed more than that.
I don't feel like that's gonna.
They take 2 hits on the battleship and then they take out the 2 carriers. So the defenders are firing back. They've got 4 2s and 7 4s.
7. Yeah.
7 4s.
Come on, brother. Come on.
Ouch.
1,
Oh my
2,
gosh.
3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
9 hits.
Oh my
9 out of
gosh.
11. It was brutal, man. Brutal.
5 6 7 8 9. Right. 1 2 3 4 5
really
6
excited.
7 8 9.
So many losses you can't keep
on a second.
track.
Right.
1
The tipped
2
mouse
3
missing.
4 5 6 7 8 9. And I tipped the
Let's
battle.
see if we can turn it around here in this.
I need to hit with all of them.
And we got 4 hits.
4 hits.
4 out of 5 is not too shabby.
You got 4 hits there. 4 out of 5. That's pretty good.
Pull these.
Oh, I missed you.
And then,
I needed to shoot 80% the
Yeah.
roll.
all right. So we got 2 at 2 and 7 at 4.
9 dice now.
Yep.
That'll do it. 1 2 3 4 5.
That's 7 more
Hey,
hits.
great game, guys. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Very well done. How many you hit? 7 again?
Yeah.
Ouch.
Yeah. Ouch. You hear that?
Man, that's tough.
Yeah, they hit me. They rolled 20 dice and hit me 16 times, and I only hit them 8. So they doubled me up. It was brutal.
That's one to write home about, I would say. I think that's going to be pretty tough to top. I mean, you got Manila, right? So in reality, what happens here is we do get back to a 9-9 victory point score, but at the end of the Americans' turn, it's going to come down to the total IPC production for all of the powers at this time. And at the end of the game, the Axis are clearly making considerably more than the Allies. So that's going to be the ball game. So at this point, Doug concedes the game to Dave and Keith. Congratulations to Dave and Keith. They'll be moving on to the semifinals. We will have that game for you in the very near future. I think this was a really interesting game. I think, yeah, there was a couple of moments where we could have made some more aggressive choices for sure.
Obviously disappointing. Played some really good players. So kudos to them. I would say that I played a bit of a sloppy game, and I didn't really do much with Britain. When you look at the whole of the game, what did Britain accomplish? And it's honestly kind of nothing. Like, I attacked France and didn't do anything. I built 3 aircraft carriers that didn't do anything. I attacked Burma a couple times that got me nowhere. So, yeah, I mean, there are a lot of missed opportunities there. I feel like I kind of did a little bit of what I recommend players not do with America, where they're kind of trying to go one way, then the other way, then this way, then that way. And I did that with Britain.
And with the U.S. I mean, the fighters going and the transports going to the Atlantic side. We preached this in the 42nd edition videos, right? Like, you have to stay focused on a particular target.
Yeah.
I think this is probably evidence of that still holding true in the anniversary edition, but also that even players who know better can certainly make these kinds of mistakes. And I think this was an early exit for a world champion, which is tough. You said something a second ago, Doug, that I would push back on. You said the UK didn't do anything. They did hold Calcutta in the face of a pretty aggressive Japanese push towards that victory city. That is not always an easy thing to do. Could it have been more aggressive? Well, yeah, I think we could absolutely say that. But I think the complex in India was a reasonable purchase. I just would have used it to, and of course this is all hindsight, right? Like, we've been staring at this map for a long time. So, but I think that there's certainly opportunities here, but I think you needed a 6th turn to be able to turn the tide.
I'll be honest, I don't know what happened with the time. I mean, I see as a player in a tournament, it's my responsibility to know what's going on with the time. I don't know how the confusion entered, how all 3 of us thought the time was out. But, yeah, I mean, I can say we could have had more time, or what if this, that, and the other. But at the end of the day, like, I have to know what the time is, and we have to be checking in on that stuff. So, I mean, it's tough, but he would have also had more time to bolster those victory cities in Asia. It would have been great if I could have brought my other fighter and my bombers to bear on that Japanese Navy. But it's a lot of what if. So it was a great game, and it was fun. So I learned a lot. Still learning a lot about this version, and looking forward to playing it more in the future.
Well, Doug, me too. I'm looking forward to getting a chance to play this game more, learn more about it over the course of this series. We've got 2 semifinal matches and the final matches coming up, and I think my man Doug here will be here commenting with me and talking about how they played it so badly.
No, that's right.
No, from the sidelines, from the cheap seats. We will, yes, but that's all right. Someone's got to talk about it, so we're happy to bring it to you. Doug, thank you so much for taking the time to walk us through this game. I'm looking forward to the rest of this series and crowning a new set of world champions.
It was tons of fun. Thanks, Gary.
All right, brother. Talk soon. Thank you for watching our coverage of the quarterfinal match of the 2024 Axis Knowledge World Championship. And thank you again to our friends at Renegade Game Studios for sponsoring this video series. We're really excited about everything they've got in store for this great game. And we hope that you'll be back for our live stream the Friday after this video is published. They are always a lot of fun. Congratulations to Keith and Dave on their victory, and thank you to Doug for walking us through it all. Next time, we'll be jumping into the first of 2 semifinal matches. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and the bell to get notified when that's ready. And if you want loads of exclusive content, including extras and deleted scenes from this game, and even raw footage from Gen Con, click the join button and find the membership level that's right for you and become an official citizen of Board Game Nation. When our coverage of that semifinal match is ready, you'll find it right here. When the live stream that followed the premiere of this video is ready, it'll be over here. For our latest bit of mayhem, right this way. And if you're ready for more from Board Game Nation, click here to subscribe. My name is Gary Blevins. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.